And I think you said this to us maybe off the record or before we started this interview, Jim. You said you're absolutely convinced that something is there, that
Yes.
it's not one of those locations where nothing's happening and people are imagining things or whatever. You think something's there. Now, when I hear that, I'm fine with hanging out outside, at least for now. Yeah.
Well,
So,
well, that's the thing about the place is that, as we're trying to describe it here on audio, but we'll have pictures, of course, on the website. And if you've ever been there or even just look at the website, it's a massive building, as Jim has said, which is kind of bracket shaped or boomerang shaped of sorts. And being outside, that's what I felt. That doesn't protect you from anything because as you'll hear from the other ghost hunters, at least Roger and Jill said, they've seen stuff in the woods nearby. They've seen stuff down at the bunkhouse. Tina has seen stuff when she was trying to work in the bunkhouse and being inside, hearing so many noises that she just said, I'm going to leave for a while because it's so noisy. I can't hear myself think. There's so much weird banging when there shouldn't have been. Stuff happens all around that place on the inside and out. So when I walked around the place, same thing as Jim, I was like, there could be something looking at me from one of the windows. Better just to spray the room. Just capture everything. Get as many photos as you can. And often you don't find anything till you get back home.
it becomes like the unpacked suitcase from a trip.
Yeah.
You get back, because that's the thing, Jim, right? You set up 55 microphones and all kinds of cameras and all kinds of crap. And what you're forgetting is that you're quadrupling the amount of media that you're capturing that then has to be gone through when the trip is over. And for every room and every device and all of this media, we have 23 gigs of media from the Sally house, from the Pickman family, that they haven't even gone through. They were like, here, you guys do it. I was like, yeah, sure. And it's just sitting on a hard drive.
And it doesn't make for the most interesting viewing either, because most of the time, our cameras on investigations, we lock them down. So if somebody, for example, said, well, you know what, a lot of times this glass moves on this dining room table. So we'll put a glass on the dining room table, lock the camera down, and then point it at that glass for 6, 8, 10 hours. And sometimes we've got it from multiple angles. So yeah, you're exactly right. You're looking at basically an image that doesn't move for hours and hours. And it's mind numbing is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lot of it.
Tantamount to torture.
Yeah. And until you see something, it's like, I guess, as police work is described, it's just long stretches of boredom peppered by heightened excitement. When I was running around there, and there was a long stretch of that where I was by myself with the camera, and I thought, well, I'm not going to pry any doors open that are shut or walk around any place that didn't seem inviting. I missed like most of the tour, so I didn't know where I was going other than I had done some research a little bit about the place before I left. And, I had vague ideas about supposedly what's on the different floors. But Jim, where did you start off? Were you at the first floor cafeteria area? I mean, out right after the death tunnel part of it?
Yes, that's where I started. It was down on the first floor. And just real quick, what you mentioned about missing the tour and not getting like the history, even that, it seems like everything within my ghost group, we look at 20 different ways, is because a lot of times we will have different people in the group that will say, I don't want to know the history, especially. And I sometimes don't want to give the history to the people in the group that are going that believe they're sensitive or if they're psychic, because I want them to be able to pick up on something that they're really feeling. But if in the back of their mind, they're like, okay, this next room I'm going into, I'll make something up, that a woman passed away and they see her ghost in the corner. Is that powerful enough that you're going to pick up on something that isn't really there, or think you're seeing something that's not there because you have the history? So
Right.
We will go back and forth between on tours that we're given. We want to know everything, and then we don't want to know anything, or just say, you know what, people have reported stuff on this floor, and keep it vague enough where we are not honing in on things that could be accidental. The other thing is I'm convinced the ghosts mess with me in that they'll see me setting up all this equipment on the second floor, say, and then they all go down to the first floor and make loud noises so that I don't have anything on the first floor. And then we got to go down to the first floor and then they go up to the third, so.
Well, that comes back to that whole trickster element that always comes up. And then the other thing that's interesting about what you just said with controlled remote viewing, the way that they task the remote viewing situation, it's the same thing where the actual investigator, they tried to keep them in the dark. And there's a person who's like a project manager who has all the information, but gives out the least amount of it that they need to help sort of let the investigator just come across unfiltered input. And then they might say, okay, go back and focus on that, or focus on that, without trying to lead them on too much, but maybe just barely steering them in a certain direction, which there might be something to borrow there from an investigation standpoint
Yeah.
in an investigation like what you do, actually.
Yeah. And that being said, I think it would be really easy to set up a GoFundMe account, because I think that we all need to go back to Waverly, and we're going to get you there, Scott, and you have got to get out of the car. I think all of your listeners will agree that I think at least the three of us need to go back down there, and we are going to drag you out of the car.
It's going to be like Mystery Incorporated. I'm going to walk in with, you guys will have to be touching my shoulders on both sides everywhere we go, just moving really close together. No, I'm sure if I went with everybody, I'm sure I'd be fine. I mean, I kind of joke about it, but I also know to take it seriously now. I think part of what happened to me at the Sally House was a little bit of, like I said, my incredulousness going into the situation kind of got me singled out.
I do believe the out point for Scott, when I told him about this trip, was that the gates were going to be locked until morning. And then you couldn't, if you couldn't drive out in your rental car if you wanted to. And that was one of the rules. And I think he said, "Nah, I'm not going to be there."
Yeah, I don't want to be locked
night.
anywhere.
Yeah.
I don't want to be locked up at a resort in Hawaii. I don't want to be locked up. I'm not into locked up.
I feel you. I'm down with that. I understand. I always want to escape if I can. That's why I don't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to live on an island.
How about if I said that actually, once we start the investigation, the location would be secured so as to make it a better controlled experiment?
Yeah, I'd say that feels better.
Okay.
That feels better.
Just got to use my thesaurus here.
Yeah.
So, Jim, until we met up again, what did you do, or what did you experience that I wasn't around to see? Was there anything going on in your different locations before we all met up?
We were getting little hits on different devices, but nothing really significant. And I think you were there when we started getting a couple of stick figures that were sort of popping up on the X-Cam. Those were interesting because they would pop up, and we would let the camera settle itself down. I have to take everything that does with a grain of salt, because it wants to, at one point or another, turn everything into a stick figure. But these were instances where there would be nothing there and the camera wasn't moving, and all of a sudden something would appear, and it seemed to be a flat surface behind it.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen long enough or at an interval enough where we could be like, okay, that is definitely something there.
Right.
We also did pick up, and I think you were there as well, it was in the same general area on the first floor, with our thermal camera. There was like a big cold spot that just seemed to come out of nowhere, and it was hovering. I think it was actually at one point right next to Roger.
Yeah.
That we were looking at, and we couldn't determine where it was coming from. It was a bit frightening because it looked like a dark mass, but it was simply because that temperature was a lot colder than Roger was.
Right.
It was somewhat close to one of the doors on the other side, which was an exterior door, but it just seemed very odd. You could go over to that area and you could kind of put your hand in it and feel that it was noticeably colder.
Yeah.
But then it just sort of, it didn't dissipate. It just sort of went away, like disappeared, like almost instantaneous, which was a strange kind of thing to have happen. And there is, the whole stereotypical thing that, it gets colder, like the Sixth Sense sort of thing, that when the ghosts are around. But I don't know. That did seem a little anomalous, that it just came up out of nowhere, was there for a few seconds, and then disappeared.
Yeah, I think I walked up on that. I wasn't there at the beginning of when it was happening. Because just so people know the layout here, we're in a group, and there are a bunch of groups. I don't know how many people were there that night, maybe 35 to 40. Usually they're groups of friends. So people are split up into groups of 2, 3, 4, 5 people. And our group was basically Jim, his wife, Steph, Roger and Jill, and myself. And I was kind of off tagging along, but not directly next to everybody all at the same time for a lot of it, because I was kind of off maybe 20 feet away, 30 feet away, trying to videotape them walking around with limited success. But I walked up on that when it happened. And I remember you guys, you were talking about it, like that was freaky. And just so people know the weather conditions, if I haven't mentioned it, it was a really humid, warm night. All of Kentucky seemed to be really humid and hot. And that night, especially, was just very balmy. Like we've described, the building has open windows for the TB patients of yore. And so it's just kind of all out. And there's no air conditioning going on. There's no vents, no ducts. The outside wind, it was very minimal, if at all. I never really even felt a breeze come through, and if the slight ones that did were all warm air. So, yeah, it was very anomalous, and that was one of the highlights of the tour and the investigation. So, that's about, I think, when I started to rejoin the group. One thing I did experience for myself that was odd was, and I believe it was down near the autopsy room, where the slabs are, the
Mhm.
metal trays, and where they stored bodies before they moved them out with the death tunnel. Jill and Roger had just commented that there was a strong smell of roses, and I did smell that. Were you
Ah,
around for that?
no, I was not.
Okay. That was one thing that I was there for. And it's like, well, there's no air fresheners around. It was definitely a rose, no other types of flowers like gardenias or lavender that other people might have as an air freshener. So that was weird. A very strong smell of roses, which is another cliche with ghosts. Sometimes you'll
Right.
get a smell. It was a whole evening of very small things. I think you were in the hall, the REM pod was going nuts. And can you explain what the REM pod does and what it is?
I can explain what it is and what it's supposed to do. That's what's
Okay.
kind of interesting
Okay.
about it.
All
But
right.
basically, it sort of works as an EMF and temperature gauge, if you will.
Mhm.
It's a round device that has a series of lights on it, and it has an antenna that you can extend. And basically, the thought is that it is taking temperature readings as well as EMF readings, and that anything that comes closer to that will set the device off. So it's basically what we do is we will put it in a hallway and just sort of let it sit. And in theory, it actually does quiet down and then it doesn't do anything. They say that when something, and again, it could be a ghost, it could be just basically a cold breeze if it goes by enough or
Right.
something like that, but basically breaks that field, the device will start making noises indicating either a change in temperature is taking place or there is a change in the EMF field.
Right. I guess we're getting to the part here where we're joined up, and I can't remember exactly all the places we explored when we were kind of all together in our group of five. Where did you go after the first floor? Was it progressing second floor, third, fourth, fifth?
Yes, and I think we progressed as we were going up, but I don't actually remember when you and Steph saw my light disappear, if that was part of the tour or whether that was part of the experiment, but I think that was actually part of the tour. I'm trying to remember when that was, but I mean, you might actually remember. I just
Mhm.
remember that after it happened, both you and Steph were just very matter of factly. I'm like, well, what do you mean my light disappeared?
Explain what happened.
I believe that it was during the tour, but what had happened is, and the reason that I'm struggling with it is because Jill was the one, and she was part of our group, and she was
Mhm.
also on the tour, but it was on the fourth floor, and we had just come down the stairs from the fifth floor to the fourth, and that staircase is very close to the staging area where we set up for the creeper incident and where that had all happened. And as we came down the stairs, the rest of the group started going the opposite way, sort of away from where the creeper crept out or whatever it
Right,
did
right,
that
right,
night.
right, right.
And Jill remarked to me, I feel like there's something down there, which was she was making reference to the area where I would have had my back to
Yeah.
on that particular night. And she didn't say anything else. And then I said, well, I'm going to go look. This is what we're here for.
Yeah.
So I put on my headlamp and went walking down just in the hallway, just didn't go into any of the rooms, just walked all the way to the end of the hallway and then came back. And
Right.
I didn't feel anything or experience anything, but I don't remember. I think it was we were actually done with the tour
Mhm.
when you and Steph were like, yeah, you went down there and your light disappeared.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
I'm
yes.
like, what do you mean my light disappeared? And why are you just telling me this now?
There's lots of hallways. There are long, dark hallways, and then there are all these individual patient rooms. On the outer side of that, there's a whole outer balcony. So there's a lot of places to be where you can't be seen and that you can kind of duck around. It's not a collection of closed off rooms, but this was another odd feature of the environment there that night. And Jill and Roger and myself have talked about it a lot with Scott here. There was something very odd about the light in that it seemed not like a normal darkness that was there. Of course, there's, like I said, being open, there's moonlight that's coming in. There's a little bit of residual light, ambient light that's there. Some of us have headlamps on, but like I had mine on the color red, so it's as not to disturb anybody's night vision. And there's not a whole lot of light there. So when the light seemed to go away or go out, it seemed to be fitting with everything else we were experiencing. So maybe that's why it didn't strike us as like if we were looking at you and suddenly the ambient light that was on you just disappeared, you vanished into the blackness. But weirdly, only a short distance down the hall did it seem to get so murky that people seem to be kind of in a blackness fog of sorts, you could call it. And that's one thing I noticed with my video footage is that the infrared light didn't throw very far at all. A lot of it's very dark and you can't see what's going on. And that hasn't been my experience at other places. So it was very odd. But yeah, your light going away, I do remember you mentioning that. It was like, well, I don't know what to make of that. So I'm not going to, fill everyone's head with my speculation on it. I'm just going to say, yeah, that was odd. It seemed to happen. I don't know. I can't explain it.
And again, I didn't turn my light off or I didn't do
Right.
anything except walk down the hallway and then come back. But you're exactly right. It is something very disorienting about that building in
Yeah.
particular, in that you're right. It does seem to absorb light, which is very odd because, as we've been talking about, the patient rooms on the one side open up to a balcony which runs the entire length of the building.
Yeah.
That, when the moon is just right in the sky, it's kind of cool because the moonlight shines in all the way into the hallway. But
Right.
yet when you're going up and down that hallway, you get to certain points where it looks like the light is just refusing to go, as weird as that sounds.
No, that's exactly how Jill and Roger described it. And not having been there before, you just think, well, I guess that's the way it's supposed to be. Other than it seems a little bit unnatural. I should be able to see farther down the hall, and you just couldn't. So there does seem to be a heaviness there. Not so much something for me personally that was ominous. It just seems to be there's definitely a thickness to the air.
Yes.
That's apart from the humidity and all that. And of course, there's bats flying around and there's little things scurrying. You hear little tiny noises, but I didn't really get a bad feeling wandering in and out, other than I was really, my senses are really heightened and I was carefully paying attention while also trying to film, which is another problem I've learned too, is that if you're so busy trying to be the camera person, you kind of are missing a little bit of the experience.
Yes.
Because I'm looking down at the viewfinder and the the little tiny monitor that goes with the camera, and I'm trying to also watch where people are going and what they're saying, and I'm more focused on trying to get good footage to not such a great degree that I am kind of missing, like you said, when you're pared down and you're really in tune with the place, you start picking up feelings. But I did have a few feelings of just like, yeah, it seems like something is here, but I don't have a real strong feeling of it. So
And that's where it gets tricky because, I tell people who are from Ohio,
mhm.
even if you're a skeptic, go walk into Mansfield Reformatory because you're going to feel something. Now, is that a ghost or is that just walking into a place where all of these bad things happened? I
Mhm.
think the same could be said for Waverly Hills. I mean,
Yeah.
many, many patients went up there and never came back. I
Yeah.
mean, it was a place of sadness. I mean, all the way down to where on the tour they tell you, well, the patients that were on the side that had the balcony, those were the ones that they thought still had a chance. And
Yeah.
that once you got to a certain point, you got wheeled across the hall to the room that didn't have the balcony because they figured, what's the point? And you
Right.
just think in your mind, how depressing does that have to be if you're one of those patients that's getting wheeled out of your room with the balcony over to the other side? I mean, you're basically being told you're going to die. So
Yeah.
I think so much of that feeling and that emotion, I think that gets absorbed into it. Now, whether or
Yeah.
not that's what we call a ghost, I don't know, but it's definitely something you can't help but pick up on when you go into these places.
Absolutely, and definitely a vibe, and you just hit on something that, we've discussed in the history. Not only did it have the tuberculosis era, of which it's most famous for, but it had another era of hopelessness and sadness and death, and that's being the old age home.
Yeah.
And, stories of neglect and just not purposely mistreated, just they didn't know what to do with you. So you just kind of withered and faded, and you feel that. There's definitely a vibe, a presence to the place.
Yeah.
I don't know if that speaks to also the other things that are there. If you say that you do believe that something is there, and I certainly do as well, that there are several different types of presences there. Lead us up now to actually trying to duplicate this creeper experience. If you should have, of course, listened to part one with Jim, his strict interview talking about that incident, but could you please describe to us like how we then kind of transitioned into trying to get that experiment and that incident to happen again?
The best part about, well, I mean, I can't thank Roger and Jill enough for kind of inviting us to actually do this. So
Yeah.
I was willingly the bait for it, but it was great that we waited until late in the evening to actually do it,
Right.
which did sort of coincide to the previous, when the event actually happened, as well as the other time that we went down. So it still fit the time frame. What I was looking to do was to sort of replicate as much as possible what happened the first time when it did. So I knew where I stood. And so when we went up there, I kind of went down to the area where I had stood the first time when the creeper came up. I'll be honest, I don't know what it was.
It'll be a week between the shows. Describe what you saw that very first time.
I saw absolutely nothing. That's why I don't know what it was. But what I did is the rest of the group, there were 2 guys and 1 girl. So there were 4 of us all together. We had been told the story that if you went up to the 4th floor, and they did not tell us where to stand, but they said if you go up to the 4th floor, if one person stands by himself, the other people go to the other side of the hallway, which, I mean, that could be anywhere.
Yeah.
And face that one person, and you turn off all your lights, that this creeper, which was this sort of a black shadowy figure, would come creeping up behind that one person, but on the ceiling. I always forget when I tell the story, I'm supposed to say danger, nightmare fuel approaching before I say that. But,
Right.
But it would come up behind the one person. So that's when I said, I will be the bait. So I was at the one end of the hallway. The other 3 people went to the other end of the hallway. I had my headlamp on. I bent down. I had a video camera. I bent down, put the camera between my legs facing the other group, stood up, turned my headlamp off, and we stood there. After about, I think it was like 20 minutes or so, I didn't feel anything. I didn't see anything. There was absolutely nothing going on. But long story short, there was a ruckus at the other end of the hallway where 2 of them, the other one guy claimed he didn't see any of it, but he did leave the group shortly afterwards. So we're kind of convinced he saw it too. But both the male and the female saw me turn on my headlamp, so illuminate my entire body, bend down, pick up the camera, and then walk into a room on my left, basically leaving an empty hallway. And it wasn't until they thought that I had just gotten bored and didn't announce that I was leaving and left that they called out to me, and I answered. And they said they were looking towards that room. So their focal line was actually changed as they were looking to the right. And they called out to me thinking I was going to call back and go, yeah, I'm in this room, I'm bored. But when I said, yeah, from the middle of the hallway, they looked back and I was there. Headlamp was off. I was still standing in the same exact spot. Back to your question as to what I saw, that entire event, I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. There were no time slips or anything like that. I basically, if not for them, they saw it. I didn't have any strange experience, which messes with my head because it's the thing that in all honesty frightens me, because I don't know where I went. Because, and I think Faris, you and I were talking about it down there. If it wasn't you, it was Jill and Roger. But did something happen to the rest of the group where this darkness, if you will, just got in between the 2 groups? And because of that, they couldn't see me. I think that works to a certain extent, except they saw me leave the hallway.
Right.
So the whole something blocking me out really doesn't work because something that wasn't me walked away.
Yeah.
And that's the part that, in all honesty, weirds me out. But I personally did not feel any different. And I don't think I like to, so I can sleep at night, just say that whatever was happening happened to them and nothing happened to me. But I don't know. So,
well, that's interesting because I wanted to retell that because it's going to be some time before the people heard the story in the first interview with you. But it also connects to a very small incident, which I didn't realize at the time might have been kind of the opposite of what you just described with yourself there. And we're going to get to that in a second here as we're going to wrap this up. Now, let me ask you this, though. There was a false flag of a fright, and I can't remember now if that happened As we wrapped up, you're trying to recreate the creeper experience, or did it happen before with us in the hallway?
It happened smack dab in the middle. So it was
Okay.
maximum spookiness happened.
Now Jim is trying to recreate the same experiment, the same setup, and he is down at the end of the hallway, right? With your do you have
Yep,
a headlamp on?
I had the same headlamp.
Okay.
It still works after all these years. So I had the same headlamp and I had a video camera.
Okay.
So I was trying to basically replicate exactly how I was the first time that we did it. And I also had my digital voice recorder that I had actually put in my top vest pocket. I wear this sort of fisherman's vest,
Yeah.
but the microphones, it's a stereo mic. The two mics are actually sticking up above my shoulder. So that was in my right hand pocket. My thought being that if something was coming up behind me, I would be able to pick it up. And then what we did is Roger, Jill, you, Forrest, and Steph, my wife, you guys went a distance down to the other end of the hallway. And in between us, we put a multitude of gadgets, all of which had some sort of light up ability. So we had, I think I put a K2, an EMF that lit up, a cell sensor, which I paid the extra $5 for and got the ghost meter sticker on.
Oh,
but
of course, you got to get
lights
that.
up, yeah. So for the price,
Yeah.
The REM pod was there. So we basically did all that down the hallway so that between your group and me, if something came down the hallway that way, in theory, these things would light up. And I also think at some point, Roger had his laser grids
Yes, he
that
did.
were all around at one point. So that was basically it. Your group went to the other end of the hallway, and then we said, "We ready?" And I tried to do the same thing. I put the camera down, stood up, and turned off my headlamp, and sat in the darkness for a while.
You watch a lot of those Saturday night crime shows, right?
Oh, yeah. The wife and I just can't pass up good, twisted criminal case stories, especially one that's got an awesome Keith Morrison delivery.
Me too. Yeah, and I think a lot of people do too. Not only because we all like to see detectives solve a case, but also because of something deeper. We're all really fascinated by what makes criminals do the evil deeds they do. We all want to know why, to understand that aspect of human nature that makes up our dark side.
And that's exactly what we're learning about in the new lecture series, Understanding the Dark Side of Human Nature, over at the Great Courses Plus. Just another example of the thousands of fascinating and meaningful lectures over there, and just in time for the spooky season.
This lecture series really makes you think, because it's not only about the people who do evil deeds and why, but about ourselves too, and who we really are inside.
One interesting thought experiment in the first lecture is to ask yourself, what if you could be absolutely sure you could get away with doing something criminal, or even just fulfilling some desire that's considered immoral? Would you do it? And maybe you wouldn't really do it if you had the chance, but if you've just entertained the possibility, just thinking briefly about what you might want to do, doesn't that suggest that we all have a dark side?
Yeah, I'll bet most of us have at some point, and I think it's why we're fascinated by true crime. It's an aspect of human nature that's so mysterious we're compelled to try and understand it. And if you think we shouldn't examine this dark side of human nature, then consider what Professor Daniel Breer says in the lecture, that we can't fully appreciate what it means to be human unless we understand and come to terms with our dark side. Focusing only on our strengths would be distorting and dangerous because it would distract us from facts about ourselves that we have to grapple with in order to lead meaningful, fulfilling, and happy lives.
Well, as the ancient philosophers say, we have to confront the dark side so that we are not consumed by it.
So true. And there's nothing dark about feeling a sense of pride and being able to talk confidently about philosophical and important subjects like these. And now you too can get that awesome feeling of pride that comes with knowledge. And all you have to do is sign up for the Great Courses Plus.
And to get you started, for a limited time only, they're offering our listeners an entire month for free. But to start your free month trial, you must sign up today using our special URL.
That's right. Start exploring by signing up now at thegreatcoursesplus.com/legends.
That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/legends.
Hey there, we want to tell you about a new sponsor of ours, the Peloton Tread.
Oh yeah, I was super impressed with it. You're going to have to forget everything you think you know about exercise treadmills.
Done, forgotten, because the Peloton Tread is no ordinary treadmill you're used to seeing at the gym or at home. It's so much more. I went in for a demo in their Pasadena showroom where you can fully try out their machines in a session, and I gotta say, I too was super impressed. First off, the Peloton tread is extremely well built and engineered. It's the Porsche of exercise equipment. Everything about it is so well thought out and intuitive. And what sets the Peloton tread apart from the rest, I think, is that not only is the tread the best crafted exercise machine I've ever used, but the workout experience is totally immersive. And the key feature that makes that possible is that it has a 32-inch HD touchscreen and powerful built-in soundbar right in front of you. So you really feel like you're in a high-end gym getting instruction from one of their world-class instructors. And if you want it, you can stream their workout classes or play them whenever you want. Select from their music choices and even compare your own live performance metrics with the real-time metrics of other people taking the class, which adds an element of inspiration and competition. And that's what keeps you coming back, because it doesn't matter how good a fitness machine is if you're not using it.
What I thought was really innovative about it is what you're running on. Because what I disliked about the old style of treadmill is that with running on a regular belt, you get that bouncy feeling that's unnatural. And it also feels like your feet are getting pulled back as you step. But the Peloton tread is instead made up of rubber slats reinforced with aluminum bars. So it feels supportive while you're also getting that shock absorption, which my joints appreciate.
Yeah, and what I loved about it are the responsive and easy to reach speed and incline knobs, so you can adjust your pace or elevation without having to focus on punching buttons on a panel. And that used to break my stride.
When you combine all those features with the recommended accessories, you have a really comprehensive, total workout experience at your disposal. From running and strength training to boot camp, cardio, walking, stretching, all this variety can help someone at any fitness level reach their goals, and you can do it right in your own home.
Discover the immersive and challenging total body training you can get from Peloton Tread. Peloton is offering listeners a limited time offer.
Go to onepeloton.com, use the code LEGENDS to get $100 off accessories with the purchase of a tread.
Once again, go to onepeloton.com, that's Peloton, and use the code LEGENDS to get $100 off accessories with the purchase of a tread.
Hey everyone, this is Jay Perry, and you are listening to Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
In all the doppelganger stories you've ever heard or personally been a part, first of all, do you have visual? We know about the auditory doppelgangers. It seems like that kind of thing, in a synchronistic kind of way, we seem to be stumbling onto that more and more and more with shows that we've done in the past year or so, past 12 months, not calendar year. Have you had any visual doppelganger experiences outside of Waverly? And then the second question I have is, in any of the ones that you've had or that you've heard of, is there ever interaction, or is it more like an echo residual or something that seems to be acting independently or unaware of what it's duplicating, like in your particular story?
If the Wendy laugh was one that but that was an audio version. I was part of that. I don't recall my ever seeing a doppelganger personally myself, but
That's right, because you didn't see the one at Waverly either. The rest of your team saw it.
Correct.
You haven't seen one. Okay.
correct.
Okay.
I have not seen one, but that being said, other people have seen my doppelganger, for lack of a better term, at places outside of Waverly, including I had relatives of mine at Mansfield Reformatory were convinced that I had actually walked up behind them and then walked back out, and I was nowhere near them at the time. So there are multiple instances, and I do believe that there are other people who have experienced doppelganger-like activity at Mansfield, but I do know that people have seen me there as well. So, but I've never actually seen one. I've heard them, but never seen one.
Essentially, you have an off-leash doppelganger. You need to get it to some kind of discipline school, teach it some tricks.
It's funny, but when I sit, when I lie awake in the middle of the night and start thinking about these strange things, I'm like, why me? It's like, if I'm like the upper echelon of what you could be a double for, I mean, you got to readjust your priorities there. I mean, there's so many cooler people you could pretend to be, but going back to that 2-bottle conversation again, is what the heck is a doppelganger, and what does it want? We even went back to think at Waverly specifically after that incident. We went back and said, well, maybe it wasn't a doppelganger. Could it have been just some sort of weird time slip? We started thinking back to see if I had actually done that same movement and gone into that room or a room near there, either
Oh.
earlier or now we're getting really trippy, so a 4-bottle conversation, or later on in the evening. So had
Yeah.
I actually done that, just not at that point in time, I hadn't. But again, we were like, what is this? Going back to, if it is a doppelganger, what is it doing? Why is it trying to be almost exactly like me? Why did it go in that room?
Again, this is the importance of documenting things like you do as well, though, because can you imagine if you had gone back through a prior investigation and then it turned out that you had on tape you doing the action that the people said they saw at a subsequent investigation? That would be unbelievable.
Yeah, it would be really freaky, but yeah, and
Yeah.
but it goes back to being the frustrating part of this sort of work, because to talk about when we get the audio versions of these doppelgangers, we have to go back now and do the same thing to see, like, could this, because our mixing board actually as an internal hard drive, so it actually is saving itself like a regular hard drive on there. So when we're getting voices that kind of sound like us, but they're a little bit different, so okay, is that a doppelganger? Because it's not perfect. We're still having to go back and listen to hours and hours of audio to see if we did actually say that at some point, and during the saving process it just sort of jumped on there. It's also really frustrating because when we're on investigations, we've gotten in the habit of, claiming every noise that we ever make. But now, even when we're talking, if we were just sitting in a room talking, we feel the need to actually say at the end of it, and James A. Willis just said that. Because we're getting voices that kind of sound like us and are having full conversations and full sentences that it's not until we go back and we're like, wait, that just sounds a little off. But to the untrained ear, there's one that we just found that only one person actually found. Everybody else, including me, thought it was me talking. But one person was like, wait, he wasn't in the room then. So it creates this whole other level of, I got to review this evidence again. I keep telling people that I think what I've learned from the ghost shows is that I think I need to have somebody that does really good theme music, because after their investigations, they're like, all right, let's pack up. And they play like 20 seconds of like theme music and they're packed up. Or they're like, oh, we got to review this. And then they do a little montage and stuff like that. And they're done. It's not just hours and hours and listening. It's just crazy. So I need theme music, I guess.
I think everybody does. Everybody needs, some kind of life soundtrack to go with whatever they're doing.
Getting back onto the ongoing trip to Waverly. So you guys were unable to summon the creeper or a doppelganger on this particular
trip. Hold on. I'm getting to that because something appeared. I'm going to explain that, and I don't think Jim saw it. Well, first of all, yes, we have a photo. I took a photo of Jim with his headlamp on, so that'll be on the website, on the webpage, standing dramatically in the halls, light shining down, so you can really see the setup with a little bit more light. So getting back to the setup of the creeper capture number 2, the incident, we are now separated in the hallway by a distance of about 30 feet or so, 40 feet.
Yeah.
We're at the one end. There are devices. There's a REM pod on the floor that Jill had. Something that Jill told me is that they were once on an investigation there and they were leaving. What happens if you do an all-night one? You kind of wrap up at 4 or 5 in the morning, I think. And there's a bunkhouse that Charles and Tina have. It used to be the water cairns, the large water tanks that supplied Waverly, because it had to have its own supply of a lot of stuff being up on that hill by itself. They've turned those into bunkhouses, but there's microwaves. It's like a nice hotel room kind of a situation in these old concrete water tanks that they've converted. And you stay there, you get done, you can sleep there for a few hours and then leave a little bit later, by like noon or so. And as they were leaving, that's when Zach and the Ghost Adventures crew showed up for their stint and investigation at Waverly. And Jill said, oh yeah, there are 3 or 4 large production trucks full of gear. And that includes all the ghost gear, all the lighting gear, their command central. She says they are going in loaded for bear. And of course, the reason is they can't keep coming back. They got one episode to do. They got to get something.
Yeah.
So they load the equation up on the front end by just having as much gear and as much sensing equipment as they can, set up as in many places as they can, with an outside control factor. Plus, they got editors for the show. They can comb all through this because they have to get this down to a science, at least for television. So we are in the hallway with a fair amount of gear, I would say, and we were getting hits. So that REM pod occasionally was going off for a while there. And as Jim described what the REM pod does just a little bit earlier, what Jill had told me is that you had to be very close to it. I think within 18 inches.
Yeah. It's very close.
You have to be very close. That's the design of it, because it doesn't want to start picking stuff, picking us up, moving around and shifting positions. The REM pod is getting some hits. There seems to be some very subtle things going on, but nothing that I can get on camera that I've seen so far. So for a good 20 minutes, really nothing's happening at this point. And then there's a burst of excitement, which I'm very glad I got on camera, because Jill and Steph are now standing near each other about 15 feet further up from me, and I'm even further down the hall. And Jim is still in the darkness, and I hear a little bit of commotion. Again, this is the part where I just mentioned, where if you're trying to film, you're missing a lot of it, and it's not ideal, but I wanted to document this as best I could. I hear a little bit of commotion where they're sensing something like, did you hear that? There's something walking. There's something, we're hearing some movement. And then there's a huge shriek, and it's Steph just screaming. And Jill also kind of yelling like, oh my God. So what had happened apparently, and again, it's not that clear on camera because I'm way down the hall and it's dark, but apparently what they both saw was they hear this kind of rustling, this movement coming down the hall near them in one of the rooms. And again, we're in the hallway. Adjacent to that are the patient rooms. Outside of that are the open balconies. They hear a little bit of rustling, so that got their attention. And then an arm comes out, I believe, from one of the rooms towards them, and they just, rightfully so, like Steph just lets out a shriek because we're not expecting anything.
And then a head came out.
And then a head peeks out from one of the rooms. Yeah. And it certainly got my attention, but I'm like, whoa, is the camera running? Can I see this? That's where my mind is at. Because I don't know what's going on. They saw something. And of course, it's just like us getting something on the DR60 at the Sally House. Like, yeah, we got something. Can't wait to look at it. And as it turns out, I believe it was one of the other tour group members who had come down the hall and had not announced himself, which is a big no-no in the ghost hunting tour group rules, is that if you're approaching an area and you see that there's other people there, you have to announce yourself because of what just happened, that you scared the crap out of all the other group because it's like, oh my God, is this an apparition? What's going on here? It is on tape, but there is Jill saying, dude, not cool. You don't do that. You got to announce yourself. And I felt bad for the guy because he probably just forgot or didn't know. He's like, no, I talked to the guy that's in the hallway up ahead, which would have been Jim. Did he talk to you?
No, he didn't talk to me.
Oh,
I think it was Roger that he said that he had talked to.
Oh, that's right. Okay. So he had said, oh, I said hello to Roger or whatever. And then he just kept approaching, but he came in from the balcony because you can move in freely. There's no doors in a lot of those patient rooms. You can move in freely from walking down the balcony from the outside portion to the inner rooms and then into the hallway and not have to open a door. So he was quietly walking, and that's what the creaking was and a little bit of the rustling. And then he can tell that there's other people in the hallway. I'm sure he heard us talking, but he just decides he's going to reach out with his arm and then pokes his head out, not announcing himself. So of course that was a hilarious moment, but I felt for them. It's like, it just terrifying because suddenly now here's this apparition right in front of your face. Did you see any of that as it happened?
I did not, because there was a perfect storm that took place. I mean, I certainly heard it, but that was when the gasp or the moan happened. And I think that added to why Steph was so freaked out by it, because she heard that noise. And to set the noise up probably about 10 minutes before that, when the REM pod that was at your end of the hallway started going off, we started hearing footsteps and noises. And when I turned around, at one point, people thought they saw a light go behind me. And I heard what sounded like people on the staircase going up to the 5th floor. And I called out and said, is anybody there? And they didn't answer. So that started the conversation. I think there's other people on this floor. There's real people here. I don't know how controlled this is going to be. And a few minutes after that, I heard them coming down and we called out and they looked at me and then continued on, but they were definitely real. So again, that became we're trying to do a controlled experiment, but we clearly have contamination going on here. And then probably about 5 minutes later, there were no noises or anything like that. It was rather still, but Jill's REM pod started going off again. And at that point, I heard from behind me over my right shoulder what I initially heard as a gasping or a moaning, which was very loud and very pronounced. And in the audio that I sent you, you can hear rustling because that's my beard getting caught on the vest that I had on, because I whipped my head around because it sounded so close to me that I expected to see someone behind me, thinking there was someone real behind me who was kind of fooling with me or doing something, but there was no one there. And that's where on your video, which I think is very interesting, is you guys are all talking and it's my wife who says, wait a second, what was that noise? So she does hear it. And then I think Jill says, wait, I heard that too. And you ask me, what was that? And that's when I kind of respond like I'm one of the little rascals with like, I don't know. So now we have this event where I think Roger then just like says quite loudly, are you serious? And he starts walking down the hallway towards me.
Yeah.
And it's at that point. So now Jill and Steph are like really excited because they're like, what was that noise? We all heard a weird noise. That's when the guy poked out and at them. So that's what really led to them really freaking out.
Yeah.
And in his defense, he had said he had heard that noise too. He was walking by and he had poked his head out because he had heard it and wanted to see what it was. Initially, that led to certainly me thinking that was him. He made that noise.
Right.
But then, and it goes back to, it was great, Forrest, that you were actually recording the video at that time, because when you listen to how loud that noise is from your perspective, from your end of the hallway, I mean, some of you didn't even hear it.
Right.
And then you listen to how loud and pronounced it is on my recorder. There's no way that it could have been him, because the time from that noise to be that close to me and when I whip around not see him, he had to have been further away. But in order for him to then get all the way down the hallway to then poke his head and arm out at Steph and Jill, there's not enough time that he could have done that, because he would have had to have run out onto the balcony and then come back. And I didn't hear anybody running. There was no noise. So
how long is that balcony too? That's like a long thing.
It runs the whole length of the outside of the building. Now to run from where I was to where he poked his head out would have been maybe 30 or 40 feet. If he was as close to me as that noise appears on my recording, I don't think it's possible for him to have even gotten far enough away between when the noise happens and I whip my head around. So I think I would have seen, especially since I could see out to the balcony, for him to have gotten that quick away, he probably would have had to run from me through the patient room and then turned the corner out at the balcony. But to get the whole length of the balcony was about 30 or 40 feet that he would have had to sprint from. And based on how Steph described why it freaked her out so much, is the way that he came out. He didn't just walk out into the hallway. He, no pun intended, he kind of crept out. He kind of just poked his arm and head out into the hallway slowly. So it seems way too advanced to kind of actually do that just to try to scare all of us.
Yeah.
It didn't seem like I'm going to make a weird noise and then run the opposite direction and get away.
Yeah.
I initially, I mean, in the emails we had back and forth, I think I even told you guys, I think it was him, but I don't think it could have possibly been him. I'm not taking it. I do still have to think there were multiple ways that the our experiment could have been contaminated,
Hmm.
but I don't think he is responsible for that noise at all. I don't know
No,
where that noise came from.
I don't believe so either, because this is what's so weird about it, is that I did not hear it when it happened organically. And I was right, very close, probably 15, 20 feet away. I didn't hear anything. I then heard Roger go, "Are you kidding me?" Or just, he couldn't believe it, because it's like, what was that? And then I
Right.
walked up, and then I waited for you guys to kind of catch up to where I was. You played it right away for me. It's like, whoa, I didn't hear that at all. Certainly heard on the recorder.
All right, so we've been talking about this. I'm sure people want to hear it. So we're going to go to these clips now. We're going to hear Jim's wife, Stephanie, her reaction that we just talked about. And then we're going to play the groan, which honestly, for me, after the Sally House, is one of the creepiest things I've ever heard. So let's roll that now, and then we'll come back and talk about it after.
I don't know.
Are you serious?
What was it? I thought there was somebody else here. Yeah.
I'm putting my light on.
I was going to say, it's not like that.
Is somebody down here?
What?
What? What? What happened?
Not cool.
Not okay.
Identify yourself.
It was like a gas, sorry.
Yeah.
But it came from down here. I didn't hear it up.
I just talked to them, sweetie. Yeah.
It couldn't have been down this far. Stopping recording.
Right. So that was the clip exactly as it came out of James's digital recorder that was in his right shoulder, upper right shoulder pocket of his photographer's vest, with the microphones pointing over his shoulder and kind of behind him in a way. You could hear everything in that. We wanted to play it in its entirety so that you would know that nothing had been altered or changed in that particular playback. You can hear all the handling noise or the rustling noise from him walking around and his beard, as he said, brushing the microphone. But you also hear that groan. Now, in this next clip, it actually is compressed so that you can clearly hear the groan. So the audio levels are adjusted on everything, but there's no editing in it, and nothing has been added to it. It's just a little bit more compressed so you can really hear what's going on. After that, we're going back to the show.
I had a 2-degree temperature by the time I was
Okay. I want to make sure you're real people. What was that noise?
I don't know.
Are you serious?
What was it? I thought there was somebody else here. Yeah.
I'm putting my light on.
I was going to say, it's not like that.
So there you have it. Sequence of events.
Yeah, so one kind of comical, one really creepy. And Jim, again, just so people know the order, the groan happened first, and then the guy poked his arm out and his head out, and that's when you hear the shriek.
Yeah, it's on the on your video, the audio from
Yeah.
your video that you had. The groan is right before Steph actually, then you'll hear her say, "Wait a second, what was that noise?"
Right.
That's where the groan appears from your perspective.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then the shrieking and
There was a lot of commotion, I would say, that ramped up to that, and us ending that experiment in the hall. And before I get to explaining what I saw, my impression of the groan, when you just played that for me, my first gut reaction is, well, Yeah, it sounds like an old guy in misery, with tuberculosis pain and all the horrible but well-meaning treatments that they tried to perform on people, and just the pain and misery of the place, or somebody who is dying as it was an old age home, and just somebody in agony. That's just the gut impression that I had, was that it was just kind of pain and misery and agony and despair.
Yeah, it's horrifying, like suffering.
Yeah, exactly.
When I heard it, and these are one of the things that, the skeptic in me is like, man, that is too good to be true.
Right.
But I've tried to go back and think as to what I initially thought it was, what it sounded like. And I can't say that it sounds like that in my head when I heard it in real time, but I do just remember thinking somebody just made that noise. I think that's why I didn't really focus on the noise in real time and why I whipped my head around, because I think there's someone there making a noise at me. I didn't expect there not to be anybody there, but it did seem that loud. The interesting thing too about it is that the top of my digital voice recorder that recorded that, as I said, it's got 2 microphones. It records in stereo. Both of those mics stick out over my shoulder. So I tried to go back and see if I could place directionally where it was coming from, where that noise came from. I can't, other than it does appear to be behind me and off to the right.
We don't have video of this moment, right?
I don't believe, if it is, they're way down the hall. I'll have to take a look again, but I was not right
so
there.
We should sync some stuff up, if we can. I'm really curious about how this super nerdy vest you got with recorders.
It's very
sticking out
cool.
of it.
That's a very cool vest. It's not nerdy at all.
No,
Hang on, I've got a visual. Hang on.
Oh, okay, nice.
It's a photographer's vest.
Okay, yeah, so it's like right up about your shoulder height.
And the noise is literally my beard when I went like that, when I turned, hitting up against that.
Are those like a Zoom where you can adjust the field on them from like 90 to 120?
Yeah, and they are 90.
They're at 90. Okay. Was it in stereo mode or mono mode?
It was in stereo.
Have you looked at the waveforms to see if which channel was louder?
Yeah, that's where it was.
The one away from you.
So it was coming. Yeah.
Wow.
So after the commotion of the shriek, I mean, we were getting some stuff, like I said, and it doesn't sound very impressive, because just describing a REM pod going off when you're not there is not that dramatic, but we were getting hits on that. So that's going off with nobody around it. I believe we were getting some EMF readings as well. So there's a little bit of activity, but nothing visual. And after 30 minutes or so, Jim, we finally wrapped up the hallway creeper experiment, because time kind of does fly. I mean, it can be kind of boring for some, or tedious, I would think, because you were just mostly waiting. It's like fishing. Some people find that boring. Some people find it relaxing. And it's kind of the same for ghost hunting. So as we were sitting there in the hall and didn't really see a black specter or a black shadow sludge entity of any kind, the 4 a.m. hour was soon approaching, and we had a couple more spots we wanted to get to. The last one, I think, being the death tunnel, before our time was up there and we had to leave. So we were wrapping up the experiment, and then something that is both very pedestrian and mundane, but in hindsight now, very strange and unexplainable, happened. And we didn't really talk about it at the time. So, and I don't know if it's anything, but now that we've discussed it and who saw what, I do really wonder about it. And this is what happened. So we're wrapping up the experiment in the hall, and I've been filming for about 15, 20 minutes, the duration of the experiment. And we're like, well, okay, well, I guess the creeper hasn't really come back, even though there are things kind of seemingly weirdly floating around in the hall, setting off some of the meters. And I stopped filming. So right now, my camera, our wonderful ghost supply store video camera that's shooting in full spectrum light mode. So it's getting infrared plus regular spectrum visible light with 2 IR lights on it. I'm ramping that up. It's on a little tiny portable handheld tripod that you can put, they're about a foot high with flexible legs. So I'm picking that up off the floor. I'm turning the camera off. And right now there's a bunch of commotion. Part of the reason we wrapped filming there is that now there's other groups coming down the hall, and they're talking, and As Jim said, the site is fully well contaminated, that spot of the hallway, which is fine. That's, again, one of the pitfalls of having a large group going through is that you're having to contend with other groups going through and wanting to see their own sites and wanting to take their own tour and go to the places that they want to. And they've paid their money and they're certainly allowed to. So they're coming down the hallway and there's more talking and you can hear footsteps and there's other groups and they are announcing themselves now. So we're kind of ramping up. And as we're doing so, I believe Jim still has his headlamp on and we're now trying to take an accounting of who's all there, who's coming down the hallway, what group is it? And I look up and a guy that I can only describe as what I call the dude and not the dude from the movie. I look up and it's a guy who appears to be like in shorts and a t-shirt and a ball cap. And he quickly passes in front of Jim and he's lit in regular spectrum light, like white light. And I can see him. And I thought maybe he's being illuminated by somebody's headlamp. And he quickly passes in front of Jim as Jim is looking down and getting his gear wrapped up and ready to go because we're going to walk somewhere else. And he ducks into one of the patient rooms, which also lead out to the outside balcony. And again, there's no doors on these. So he quickly passes in front of Jim and ducks in. My first thought was like, oh, there you go. Everyone's just walking around now. And we got to move on because they're just willy-nilly just walking down the hallway. And I turned off the camera. I'd stopped filming. So that's fine. And I believe somebody, I thought it was Steph, or it could be Jill and Roger, said, oh, somebody just passed in front of you, Jim. And you look up, Jim, and you said, no, they didn't. I didn't see anybody.
Right.
And you didn't, did you?
No, I didn't. And at that point of the evening, I would have said something if somebody did pass that close in front of me because I was still trying to, in my head, figure out all these things just happen. What could have been ghostly and what could not have been ghostly, just to try to compartmentalize all the different things so that when I went back, I could be like, okay, well, anything that happens from this point on, we have to throw out.
Right.
So had somebody walked that close in front of me after having previously tried to get two groups of people to announce themselves and they just kind of looked at me and kept going, the New Yorker in me probably would have come out and I would have said something.
Yeah.
A bit sarcastic, perhaps.
Yo, I'm packing up here.
I'm ghosted here. I'm ghosted here.
But to that end, and I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I mean, when we do investigations with even large groups of people, if they're ones where we go to, say like a Mansfield and we've rented it out, we try to control the number of people that come in. And then what we do is we break them into groups. And then I create, as best that I can, because I was an English major, but create a timetable, which is, for example, I would say, okay, my group from 9 to 10, we are in solitary confinement. We can go anywhere we want in solitary confinement, but we can't leave there. We do that because it's scarier that way.
Yeah,
You've got a small group in solitary, but it's also because, and solitary is several floors, that if we're on the first floor in solitary and we hear footsteps coming from the second floor of solitary, we know that there is no group in there. Or we can look at our sheet and be like, okay, yep, another group is actually there. Since that was not part of this particular investigation, we were trying to have to figure out who was where they were and at what point in time. So I think that kind of made things a little frustrating, but also intriguing, because when you take a look back at all of the things that happened that we couldn't explain, they started really small.
Yeah.
And had there not been other people in the area and had we not run all amok because, you know, Steph screamed and all of that, if you look at it, it started with weird readings coming up. Then there was an audible noise, and then possibly there was actually a visual. So was something building up there? It's just that because we were having to deal with so many things and weren't able to stay in one place and just kind of check it out, we missed out on it, or end up rightfully so questioning it when really something was really going crazy on that fourth floor.
Yeah.
That was paranormal.
You know, in light of the things that like might have gotten missed and that sort of thing, and I don't know because I don't have a GoPro, why not like be wearing a GoPro and recording literally everything that's falling on your eyes during the entire time?
We have actually played with doing that and trying to do that. It goes back to what Forrest was saying earlier when he had his video camera out. We haven't gotten comfortable enough with them yet that we can just do sort of like what police officers do. They just turn on their vest cams and they go about their business. Every time we had one of them on, we were playing with it. We were trying to adjust it, or we were looking down to make sure it was capturing anything. So it's a great point. It's something that we've started looking into. We just want to make sure that we don't fall into that trap that I mentioned earlier, that we have so much equipment going on that we're spending more time focusing on adjusting everything and not really paying attention to what's happening around us. But it is something that we're trying to do. We've gotten to the point also that on smaller investigations where we have power throughout the entire thing is our DVR cameras, we will assign somebody to just sit and watch the cameras. We will always be on the cameras, the rest of the group, but we've gotten in the habit of, okay, I'm on camera. I don't have to worry about making sure that there's the right angle. If somebody else is taking care of that, I can just investigate. So it's a great point though, Scott. It is something that we're trying to, how do we bring in enough audio and visual stuff that we don't feel the need to keep playing with it, that we can just let it be and focus? So we're still trying to find that mix.
Especially with a group as large as yours, it's like if you just assigned everybody one piece of media to analyze and say, hey, get this back in 2 weeks, and then you get all 25 clips looked at or heard in that amount of time, and then they send it back with a report or something,
Yeah, and even with that, when you get into the analyzing of it, we kind of go back and forth, because sometimes originally it was, okay, you were recording this, you take it back, you were there, you analyze it. But then we found that sometimes it's better to have somebody who has no context, especially with the audio, because then they're like, well, wait a second, I heard this weird noise or this weird noise. So we keep going back and forth as to how to actually do that. And all the way back to, I have been doing this for so long, and a lot of the people in the Ghosts of Ohio, I think the average length of time is like 11 years that they've been doing this with me within the Ghosts of Ohio. You can't help but get jaded. And so it's something that we keep trying to mix things up so that it stays exciting, because like what we talked about, you're sitting in dark rooms for hours on end. How do we mix it up and keep it fresh? Not only so that we want to keep investigating, but also because we don't want to subconsciously turn ourselves off to the ghost experience. What I was talking about earlier, you get so jaded that you go in there and even subconsciously you're like, there's nothing here. There's nothing here. I mean, the Waverly thing is a great example, because what led up to that groaning noise, or whatever that noise was, I was like, there's nothing here right now. And this is getting annoying because people keep walking in and out. They're not taking what we're doing seriously. They're not announcing themselves. And I was starting to get frustrated. Well, if I had packed it in right then and there, that groan, we wouldn't have gotten the groan.
Yeah.
The same thing is that I don't know why, because when the groan happened, then Steph screamed, and then I was comically, and thankfully it didn't show up on your video, I went instinctively going down the hallway to see what was wrong with my wife, to protect her, because she does not, no one's going to believe this because it's going to go out over the interwebs now, but Steph does not scream like that or very often.
No.
We live out in the country. I mean, she handles spiders and snakes and all kinds, but to hear my wife scream, I immediately came out of investigator mode and was like, I have to protect my wife. Something real is happening. And then as I'm going down the hallway, Roger is coming towards me saying, what was that noise? And then I hear, okay, there were real people with my wife. I'll go fight them later. But now I have to go back into investigator mode and find out what's going on. I don't know why we didn't, out of frustration, pack it up right then and there. But the fact that we didn't, and then you possibly had an experience, does that go back to this synchronicity thing that everybody's talking about? I mean, I don't know why. And that, I guess that's a question for you, Forrest. I don't know why we didn't just be like, okay, whatever, and pack it up right then and there, because at that point, everybody was coming down to see what the commotion was about.
It was mostly that singular guy out in front of his own group. So he was maybe 50 feet, 100 feet ahead of his compatriots. My feeling was that you want to keep going. It's just like, I don't want to give this up right yet. I have the same feeling when I go fishing.
Right.
Or playing blackjack, frankly. If like you get a bad dealer and it's just like, I'm going to ride this out. And then, $300 later, it's like, that was a mistake. You're just hoping for the tide to turn here. And I think at that point, the thinking was that, okay, this guy has come through. He's kind of, we've noted that he's going to pass on. He's very sorry. He had an explanation or an excuse. So we'll just keep sitting here for a little bit more and see what else we can get, because my other feeling, like you said, a lot of stuff happens at the very tail end of when you're just waiting for it. It's just at the last moment, then it comes through and something happens. And I had that feeling too. When Steph let out the shriek, that was also my first feeling, is that these, instantly as that was happening, is like, these people are experienced. Like, they've been on tons and tons of ghost hunts. And in that moment in my mind, it's like, okay, something major just happened, because they don't spook easily. She must have seen something, and Jill reacted too, so that was a moment of heightened excitement. We didn't go much longer after that. So as we were wrapping up, that's when kind of everybody, it felt to me, let their guard down and like, okay, time to wrap up this location. We're going to go on to the next one. Make sure I got all my batteries. Don't leave anything on the ground. I got my phone. Make sure the camera's all secure. And that's when I'm fiddling, and I look up, I glance up at you, Jim, and that's when the guy passes in front of you, and he's brightly lit, not fully lit. And that, I guess it's not like a full apparition as you would see, like he was a cutout character walking through the frame. I look up, and it's like he's partially illuminated as if by a headlamp or flashlight. And I can clearly see him. Like I said, it wasn't a tall, the Hat Man or the black sludge specter floating by, or somebody dressed in medieval costume here, which would normally get your attention right away. That like, okay, that's out of the ordinary. I should pay attention to that. That's probably a ghost. It looked like a regular dude, like a college guy, maybe late 20s, early 30s in age. But the odd thing is that I saw most everybody as we're starting the group of who was all in our tour, and I certainly saw them on the tour.
How many people were in there? There was a lot of people. I know that.
Well,
right?
as
It was
we
a big
said,
group.
Maybe 25 to 30 people, I would say, is a good estimate
Oh, okay.
altogether.
Okay.
It's like 6 groups of 3 or 4 or something like that.
There's no pictures of the entire group or anything, is there?
No, I guess that's one of the things that normally you do is you take a group photo, but it didn't happen this time. Of course, when we ended, it's like 4:30 in the morning by the time we wrap up, and we book space to stay and sleep in the bunkhouse because Jill, Roger, myself, their son, we all had a big trip ahead of us right after that. It's a week-long adventure, and that started it off. So we didn't all take a group photo, but what I can say is that this guy did not look like anybody else that I saw on the tour. Now, that's not conclusive. I can't take a visual accounting of every person that was there, but I saw at one point, I think I saw pretty much everybody that had been on the tour that went on it and finished it up. And as we said earlier, once it's going and underway, they lock the gates. No one else comes in. Now, during that time, we had some interlopers come on the grounds, and that was, again, maybe a conversation.
Oh, yeah. I just heard this
Yeah.
yesterday. People like jumped the fence or something, or
Since it shut down.
it probably happens all the time there, I guess. But
What's funny is I was listening to Hillbilly Horror Stories, and Jerry Pauley, grew up in the area around Louisville. He has personal experience as a teenager, and he's a young person being there, going to drink beer and fool around and just kind of hang out where no parents are. And that's his experience. So people had always routinely gone in there to vandalize and do all their young people kind of deeds. And that still continues to go on, except that Charles and Tina have it really locked down as much as they can. Like, there's pretty good security. They have full security cameras around the place, so they catch anybody trying to sneak onto the property. So it still happens. But our tour guide, who also kind of runs security for the evening, Ernie, ran out there and kind of headed them off and was like, hey, this is private property. And they're like, oh, we didn't know, that kind of thing. So he chased them away, but they did not approach or get into the building. I don't believe that it was anybody, that groan happened from anybody, coming from anybody from the outside. That was not part of our group.
To add to that, the groan, I don't think could have been, in order for where it appeared to come from, which would have been slightly or further behind me, but off to my right, the only way to have gotten back that way would have been to have come down from the side that Forrest was on, but further out, like out on the balcony side. Or there was a staircase that you could go up, but that staircase was on my left, maybe about 6 foot behind me. I really don't think that that noise could have been made by anybody that was back there, which is weird to say because it was too loud to be true almost. But I don't think that was actually a person. But also, I don't think what Forrest saw could have been an actual person. One, because if it passed that close in front of me, and like I said, and I didn't react to it, I would have seen it. But for that person to have gotten in front of me while I was cleaning up, again, they couldn't have come from the stairs because the stairs would have been behind me.
Yeah.
And this was in front of me. So they would have had to have come down past you for us to actually do that.
Yeah. No,
so I don't think it was a person. And I don't remember anybody being, because in between sessions, or especially in the beginning, we were all kind of grouped together in the gift shop, and I don't remember seeing. Now there could have been somebody there, and I just didn't see him. But I don't recall anybody being dressed like that at all.
No, nobody, as far as we knew, was even wearing a ball cap there, because again, it's kind of hot. But that's just, again, it was a real flash. Plus, you would have heard the footsteps right in front of you, because as I saw it, he was maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 feet even at the furthest from you. You would have heard the footsteps right in front of you, or at least sensed it, because it wasn't like you were, looking down, let's say, into a, into a viewfinder on a camera or anything. You're just kind of fiddling with your gear and buttoning up your vest and clearing up the area. So it would have been noticeable. And I think I did call that out. And at the time, because my recollection is that somebody said, "Oh, somebody just passed in front of you." And I confirmed it.
The more that I hear that you say, I clearly would have, this might sound mean, but I clearly would have said something if I saw them do it, because what you're describing, I would have been picking up all of my handheld equipment that was on the floor in between us, and it would have ticked me off that there was somebody just wandering through all of our equipment, because it would have been very easy for them to step on it or kick it or something like that. So I guarantee you, if I saw something, even if I thought it was a ghost, I probably would have yelled at it to mind the equipment, please.
That was actually my first thought, because he cut right pretty close in front of you. So that was like, okay, that's weird, but not that weird, where I got to now start to think about, what did I just see? Was that an apparition? And we went to the next location, which I believe maybe one other place, and then the death tunnel wrapped out the whole investigation. And that was spooky just because of the location and the echo, and it's dark at the end of the tunnel. And Jim, and again, as a nod to their bravery, walked down to the end of the dark tunnel there, where all the deceased were carried out of Waverly.
Yeah.
But they're saying several like 1 an hour at some point at the height of it. So the death tunnel has seen a lot of death. So much so, the place, that they had to create a death tunnel because it was so demoralizing, as we said before, to have people shipped out. Describing the tunnel itself, it does seem to, whether its original purpose was just for bodies and or supplies, or just supplies, the way it's laid out and built is that on one side, on the, if you're looking down the tunnel from the top, on the right side on the floor is a smooth ramp, and there are steps. That's half of the floor of the tunnel. The left half, if you're looking down, are steps, so you can walk down. So obviously it seems to make it easier to walk up while you're rolling up a cart or something. And there are anchors in the concrete up at the top that do seem to, had some kind of machinery that may have had a contraption to pull a cable up and whatever supplies you had. And that's your understanding, Jim, though. There used to be more of a contraption up there, a mechanical device to
it was like a winch, and it was right when you went through. There was also a big metal gate, which made it really foreboding when you went to go walking through there, that they've since removed. And I guess it's just kind of because they were both old and rusted, and the cable system was no longer operational. So I guess they took it out maybe for safety reasons, but it looked like something Freddy Krueger would have down in his basement when it was up there.
It's scary. That's probably it's one of the more scary locations within Waverly, and a good place to end this. I have some photos of the outside of the opening of the death tunnel, where there's 2 gates. So there's a more solid door on it and an inner metal cage mesh kind of a door. And it's kind of corroded halfway open, and there's a little bit of a concrete bunker entrance, a vestibule, which used to be the front of it, and the rest is that, there's dirt over the top of it. There's earth and sod. So it's hard to imagine what it looked like back in the day, but you get a sense that that's where the tunnel lets out. On the nice daylight, nice and, safe, side of it. But when we were there, that's one of the more creepy locations. And as I was saying earlier, I walked down a little bit of it with the camera and then thought, I don't know what's at the very bottom of this, and I'll just wait till we all go down together. So I was glad we were all together. but we didn't really get much evidence, I would say.
No, not really. And you're kind of glossing over the fact that you only went halfway down.
That is true.
So Scott, for the record, and I also have to like chastise you because you missed a perfect photo op because as I remember, so some of you went down a little bit and then we're like, okay, we're going to go back up, and then here comes Weird Willis and his wife Steph walking hand in hand, I might add, like something out of a weird American Gothic, and we walked hand in hand all the way down to the bottom, and we stood down there for a while, and it is very creepy. It's, knowing in the back of your mind, hearing the stories that people say that this was the last journey, I guess some of the people made out of there, and sitting down there, you can kind of envision that. And then, having to walk all the way up, you kind of need to pause because it's a lot of steps going back up there, but it's also very echoey. It's a bit claustrophobic. So it's your senses are kind of working overtime as you're going either down it or back up to the top. But I will say it was hysterical because so Steph and I walked all the way down to the bottom. We stayed there for a while and then we walked all the way back up. And then the rest of the group that was still there, nobody had moved. They were still at the top, just like looking at us like, you guys really are weird. And we came all the way back up. And then somebody said, there's a weird light down there. And I went and I kind of looked and I said, I think it's one of the ducks because they sort of had sort of vents that were going up through the ceiling.
Right.
And then
I thought duck. I was thinking duck.
No, not a mallard.
Okay. Yeah. I was like, wait, there's ducks in the death tunnel? Okay.
It's to lighten things up a little bit, Yeah. You have a little machine, you pay $0.25, you get some feed out of there. It's good for the families. So I thought that it was just one of the vents. And then I kind of like looked and I realized, no, I don't know where that light is coming from. And Steph said, I don't either. So we proceeded to go walk back down to the bottom. And I don't know who it was, but it was a female in the group. And I heard her kind of whisper, they're going back down there? And we did. Steph and I walked back down to see. And the light wasn't there. So again, that was something that was just such a quick hit. I could have been any number of things, but I just thought it was funny that they thought we were weird because we walked all the way down there together and then came back up, but then went back down again. So
exactly. No, I believe I do have video of all that happening as I was rolling. Look, it wasn't because I was scared. Come on, obviously, my feeling though is like that had just happened to us earlier. Is like I don't know where I'm supposed to be. I'm the noob here. What are your final thoughts?
I think my final thought is that based on what happened, I think next year the three of us need to go back down there again. I mean, because
I'll go.
But in all seriousness, I think because if you look at what happened on that fourth floor, you saw something, Forrest. Now, was it ghostly or not? I don't know, but that's something that I haven't personally experienced it because I haven't seen it. But other people in the group doing that same sort of experiment, even though we weren't doing the experiment at that point in time, but saw something that might not have actually been there. So I think you need to go back and we need to try it again. And then the fact that you were brand new to this and hadn't been, now you're the expert now. So now you can actually give the guided tour through there. But I think that Scott could come in as like the newbie and things like that. And I think we try it again because when I look at the grand scheme of, all the things that did happen there during the course of the night, there's not a lot. But what happened, I think, is pretty profound. Again, I am my own worst skeptic.
Yeah.
And that moan is way too loud. But I was there, and it kind of goes back to what I tell people. I don't try to convince skeptics because most of them haven't had that personal experience. And it's not until you have that personal experience when you know. And I can tell you that
that's the truth.
There is no way a person could have gotten that close to me and been that loud, and I didn't see him when I turned around. Now, I'm not ready to say that was definitely a ghost or something. There could have, I don't know, there could have been something blowing in the wind. I have no idea, but I'm just trying to make up rational explanation.
I'm telling you that's not wind. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a great show last week. We've had a lot of really positive feedback. This show has been super fascinating. You've been a great guest. Actually, I was hoping maybe we can have you on again in the future if you're willing to come back.
Of course I am. Just say the word. I mean, I actually have to let your listeners know that before we actually met in person, I was actually a fan of the show.
Oh,
Scott, you were busy trying to figure out how to do your PowerPoint at Kent, so I don't think you
Oh.
actually you probably do not remember. I've let it go that the two of you actually did not even see my presentation.
I know. I'm so bummed about that.
I even gave you guys a shout out during it, but no, but the very first thing that I said to you is I introduced myself and I said that I was a fan, and you really could not care because you were trying to figure out your PowerPoint. But then I said to you, when are you going to get the mugs in? And and you did laugh about that. But no, I just say the word. I love chatting with you guys about this. And I'm serious. I think we do need to, if not Waverly, but the three of us need to go back on an investigation because, and listeners, they're not paying me to say this, but what I love about Astonishing Legends is that the two of you will beat a topic to death to get to the truth.
And then beat the ghost of that topic to death with follow-up questions.
You know, you've got your tangents, you've got all that, but you guys come at it from every different angle to try to get to the truth. And what I love about it is that the two of you really don't know what the answer is going in. And you will keep digging until you guys come out the other end and can tell your listeners, well, we think it's this. We put it all out there for you guys, but this is what we think it is. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do with all of my ghost research. So I think the three of us could do wonderful things together, wandering through abandoned, haunted buildings together. So, and I think the fact that you guys are coming at it from, we want to learn, we don't know what we're doing here. That's what I think makes you guys unique. So you guys just say the word and we'll pack up the old car with all this equipment and we'll go roaming off someplace haunted. So you just say the word, we'll do it.
I'm so down for that. And I totally agree. That's, I think that's where our approaches line up, in that we're really searching for every available explanation and considering everything. And I think that's always going to be the best approach, where you're not limiting yourself or from your own sense of boundaries of belief and reasoning that, like, well, I'm not going to look into this explanation because that just seems unlikely. Like, it might be unlikely, but consider everything. Go in with a skeptical but open mind and see what you come out with. And we're both down for whatever adventure you got planned next.
I'll think of some things, but I think to go back to what we were talking about like 9 hours ago or something, but it was the whole idea about how what I do differs from what's on television. With television, every knock that they hear, they're like, okay, paranormal, let's move on, because they've got to keep things moving. And rightfully so. They can't show all of the research or even what we're just talking about at Waverly. So now with my investigations there and yours, the one that we did together, we're up to 4 different times that we are talking about trying to do this experiment, but yet we're talking about going back again to try to do it. What sort of tweaks can we make to it? I think that's what makes what I do, or at least I'd like to think, that's what makes me different from the television shows. And that's what I think makes Astonishing Legends and the two of you different from all the other shows and podcasts that are out there, is that you guys are willing to get your hands dirty, even if that means you're getting dirt off these old books that you had to grab from the library, but you're looking for the truth. And that's something that I really can't commend the two of you for enough.
Nice words from Mr. Willis there. Thank you very much, Jim. All right, now we're going to turn the page and talk to Roger and Jill Pingleton, who were also at this particular lockdown. In fact, they were the ones who orchestrated it for James to join in this particular case. James had been and done his own investigation several times, but in this case, they wanted him to come to be bait for the creeper experiment, which you heard us talking about. Roger and Jill have a software company that we've mentioned before called Streamside Software. They have an app in the App Store called Spirit Storybox. It's very cool. You can check that out. If you don't have it, we have it on there. And in fact, it's got a couple of voices in it that are named for me and Forrest, which is pretty cool. They have other apps as well. We'll have links to all their stuff in our show notes. But right now, what we want to do is get their perspective on the events that took place during this lockdown at Waverly Hills Sanatorium. So let's roll our interview with Roger and Jill, where our first question was, why did they want James A. Willis to join them at Waverly Hills?
Yeah, so the reason we invited Jim to hunt with us is because on a previous visit to Waverly, we had our own weird experience. And it's kind of what we call the paranormal bubble or the vertigo experience. At Waverly, Jill and I were walking down a hallway, and all of a sudden the hallway seemed to just start stretching out in front of us. And the only way I could describe it is, if you're familiar with film, is the vertigo shot used by Hitchcock.
Telephoto compression.
Yeah, so all of a sudden the hallway just stretched out in front of us. And if you've seen Jaws, when Sheriff Brody is in the chair, zoom in on him and it seems to get longer in the background. That's kind of what happened to us as we're walking down the hall. And it felt like we were walking uphill. It felt like a slog, basically. But the weird thing about that incident was that there were two people walking in front of us, and they did not experience the same thing. We asked them about it. We said, did the hallway just kind of stretch out in front of you? They said, no, that didn't happen to us. So here's a case where Jill and I had experienced one thing, but somebody very close to us had experienced another thing. So we had heard about Jim's creepy creeper story on a separate podcast. I had heard about it. And then right before the Kent Paranormal Weekend, we found out you guys were going to be there, which was our big draw. But we also found out that Jim was going to be there too. And I really wanted to talk to Jim about this story because he had experienced something similar, in that the people who were watching him saw one thing while his experience was something else. And that actually led to this theory that we call divergent reality, where two people can have a separate experience. I'll read it off from the app. Divergent reality is the theory that multiple observers may experience multiple separate timelines which are equally valid, as if reality is split or diverged for these observers. So that was, he directly influenced it as well as our experience. So that's when we decided to invite him to try and recreate the experience, hoping that lightning would strike twice, not believing that anything would happen, and it did.
So let's talk about what did happen. I mean, we had Jim on to talk about it, but we didn't get the chance to get, I think it'd be interesting to get your perspective. And this is interesting to me because I didn't get to go on this trip at all. But there's a whole component of this about hearing back from everyone's different point of view about the experience.
You're getting the Rashomon
Yeah, I'm getting the Rashomon effect. So I guess what I'd like to hear from you guys is what your observations were about the experiences that Jim had on this particular trip to Waverly.
Well, I think probably the most striking piece of evidence is the moan that happened while we were on the fourth floor. To me, that was actually really, really striking. And I can start going into the chronology of this and kind of lay out where we were and how we did the setup and things like that. We've given you guys a blueprint that I'll kind of reference. Now, the blueprint was from 1962. It's of Waverly Hills. It's by Luckett and Farley. And the room numbers that I'll reference are the room numbers on the blueprint. Jim actually showed us where he was when the creepy creeper experience happened to him on that previous occasion. And he was actually right outside of room 424, which is a utility room that's between the elevator and the stairs up on the fourth floor. So he set up several pieces of equipment right there, and he stayed there, and he was the bait, basically. And then we went down, farther down the hallway, on the inside hallway near 424. And we watched his direction. Now, we started getting REM pod hits.
A REM pod is just a piece of electronic gear that basically alerts you when it's receiving an EMF signal. I had set up the REM pod in my millimeter. I was looking for temperature fluctuations, and I was pretty close to forest. We were further away. I would say I was probably the furthest away from Jim. It's really weird because I could see Jim. He was wearing his headlamp, And actually later, I put my laser grid on him just to try to illuminate him. We were physically having a difficult time seeing him. And we could see both. I could see both sides of the hall, but where he actually was standing, it almost seemed to be darker. We were trying to put light on him to watch for the creeper to come and get him.
And we have to say that it was darker than when he first experienced the creepy creeper experience, because even though the moon would have been up by then and the moon was 5 days past full, there was heavy cloud cover. So you couldn't see as well. And even Jim actually talked about how he didn't remember it being that dark. Well, it probably wasn't that dark. It was just heavily overcast.
Yeah, so we had all taken our positions, and then Stephanie was ahead of Forrest and I. She was off to our left. So we were all sort of focused on Jim, because he makes really good bait. And I didn't get any kind of tingly or any really feelings, but the equipment started alerting. We got a REM pod alert, and then I glanced over at my meter, and we had a 3-degree temperature spike. Which, 3 degrees doesn't seem like much, but you have to understand, it was leaning up right against this big concrete building.
First of all, about a minute and a half before the actual moan, I saw something break the laser beams really high. So I called it out. I heard it on Forrest's audio. We have that on Forrest's audio. I say, I'm seeing something really high, guys. Jill says, creeper high. And I'm saying, yeah, there's something up there. And I wanted to make sure that Jim wasn't somehow affecting the laser beams and causing his shadow up really high. So I told Jim to move back and forth.
That's right.
Which he did. And I verified that, no, that was not Jim moving. That was something actually much higher. And we were continuing to get REM pod hits. And then you got the temperature spike right as I saw somebody in what I would call, it's actually called the sun corridor. That is the outside hallway. That is where they would wheel the patients into the open air for fresh air back when it was a TB ward. You can see through these rooms, these patient rooms. I saw 2 people walking towards Jim. And we had another experience at Waverly before where we saw a little girl that looked like a real person, and we assumed it was a real person. And to this day, I regret that I didn't go up to them and see if that was a real person, because we believe it was a full body apparition, but we didn't know. So this time, I'm not going to make that mistake. I go out there and I said, who's there? And I didn't hear them, so I walked closer to them, and I walked all the way out to the sun corridor, and they told me their names. It was somebody that was invited on the trip by somebody else. It was a man and a woman. The man's name was Kent, and I said, I just had to make sure that you were a real person. About a second later is when the moan happened. So the reason I'm being so precise here is because Jim initially thought that guy might have been pranking him. And I was a second away from where that guy was standing. If it had been that guy, I would have heard that it was that guy, but it wasn't.
I'm looking at room 424 here, which is a bathroom. And I say bathroom not with toilets, but actually had bathtubs in it. Is that correct?
No, it's hard to read. The one that you're looking at is probably 426. It's right next to the linen room, to the right of the linen room.
Yes.
It's to the left of that, which is the utility room.
Oh, that's 424.
Yeah.
That's good. I'm glad you specified that. So that makes it easier to find. So 424 is the utility room. It's got the elevator on one side and then the stairs on the other side of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then, so where is Jim standing here when he heard the moan? He's out in the hallway in front of the door to 424?
He walked back and forth. We're down by 433. That's about where I am. The room that I walked through to get to the sun corridor was either 469 or 468 across the hall.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's probably right about the utility room out in the hallway.
Okay, so when you went through 469 and 468 to the sun corridor, were they right out there, or did you then have to walk a little ways to catch up?
They were right out there.
Okay, and how wide are these rooms, you think? They had, well, they were like 12 feet each or something?
Yeah, approximately 12 feet.
So it's reasonable to say that from the doorway there, 1, 2, 3, 4, you were 40 to 50 feet down the corridor from where he was. And then you encountered this gentleman, Kent, was in the sun corridor after you passed through either 468 or 469, a good 30 or 40 feet at least away from where Jim was when he heard the moan. And we got it on his recorder.
Right. And the moan was very loud, even down by 433, which is probably where Jill and Steph were in Forest.
Because I heard it. I think Forrest heard it as well.
You could hear it really
It
loud.
was loud.
At first, I thought it was more like a growl.
Yeah.
So I kind of assumed it was a growl. And maybe that's just like bias on my part. I would think a creeper would sound more like a growl instead of a moan, but come on.
Were there other people on the 4th floor at this time that you were aware of who were down, just looking at the blueprint more to the left or around the corner down by the orderly station or anything?
Well, the only people that had passed by there were a coworker and his party had passed through the stairwell earlier. And they actually came back to me and later and scared the crap out of me as they popped out. People were popping out all over the place. But they had to tell me that, we heard you guys talk about us as we passed through the stairwell. Well, that gave me a chance to say, okay, do you swear to God that you didn't make like a moan? And again, this is actually my boss. Tom is actually my boss. And he's an upright guy. He said, no, I swear I didn't do that. And I said, okay, did you see anybody else up on the 5th floor when you were up there? Because there had been some people trespassing earlier. And he said, we didn't see anybody. So he was in the area. And so the only other people on that floor, to my recollection, were Kent and his
Janet. I believe
and
it's his
Janet.
sister. Yeah, it's his sister.
and
Janet.
his sister. Those were the only people up on the floor. So, and I also made him swear that he didn't make that noise as well, even though, again, I was 1 second away from him and would have identified it as him if he had made that noise. I feel like I would have.
Because you were standing right next to him.
Right.
And on his recorder, it sounds like it was very close to Jim.
Yeah, on Jim's recorder, it sounds like it's right next to him, and he described it as being over his right shoulder, feeling like it was directly over his right shoulder.
And, I hate to zapruder this thing to death, but I mean, your listeners obviously listen to you guys because you're thorough, and I want to be as thorough as you guys. And so this is me picking it apart as much as I can and figuring out exactly the sequence of events.
Can we talk a little bit about the dude that Forrest saw? Are you aware of that story where he saw somebody cross?
Yeah, I'm aware of it. I did not see it at that time. I was looking around behind me quite a bit. I did almost feel like we were going to get rushed from the back. And like I said, I was further back. Did
Jill,
you see the dude?
when I reviewed some of the video, because I've reviewed all of the video files at this point, Jill was very concerned looking the opposite way of Jim. So she felt like she was going to be rushed from behind.
Yeah, I felt like we were being distracted because that's what happens when you get something that happens, everybody's attention, everybody goes running to one area. And I thought, now what's going to happen?
Well, in a way, we kind of were, because the REM pod went off. We had the temperature spike. I got drawn into the sun corridor, and then that thing did that noise right next to Jim. I immediately go down there to see if I could see anything, and unfortunately, I didn't see anything near Jim.
What you guys are describing then is that there's almost an air of manipulation, or you feel like maybe from prior investigations, and that you're basically chess pieces. It's moving you around, and then it's going to do its thing.
Yes, that has been my experience before, particularly with shadow people. I know they've been known to do that. They will almost disperse a group. They will get people separated. Your focus will go in another direction.
Or if they're not directly manipulating us, waiting until we're apart, and we were very much scattered different directions at that point.
We've talked about this before with Forrest. It's like they will wait until all your equipment is off. They will wait until every battery is drained. And it's funny, really, because people say, well, why didn't you catch that on camera? Why didn't you catch that on audio? And it's like, dude, we really wish we could have.
And definitely people have talked about this a lot. There's almost like a trickster element to this.
And I have to point out that morgue, every time we walk past it, several people, our party and another party, kept smelling roses. So a lot of little weird things, but they seem to be correlated in similar areas.
And there were some personal experiences that happened that night with Brandy. You remember we were all in that room. She felt like she was rushed. That was a personal experience that happened. But I mean, there were a lot of minor things besides the growl. The growl, or not, I still say growl, the moan. Besides the moan, it was a bunch of little stuff, and what you saw for us too. I'm not discounting that either, but it's like, where do you put all of this stuff? To me, the heaviest evidence was the moan, because we worked so hard to track that down and see who was in the area.
I did smell the roses. When we were down near the morgue, Jill noticed that, and I think who else was there that smelled it?
I
smelled it. Stephanie smelled it.
Yeah.
As well.
And I walked up behind them, and I said, oh, yeah, definitely hit me, and it was prominent.
Yeah, and one of the other groups, when I talked to them in the cafeteria at the end of the night, they smelled it as well. And that was much, much, much later.
We want to thank you so much for coming on the show and shedding a little more light on this dark subject. I have a feeling it won't be the last time for us anyway.
You know what's going to happen,
there.
though? I'm going to go back and review the footage in more detail and depth, and I'm going to find something really spectacular, and the show will be done already. But we'll have to have you back on.
Then promise me you'll do an update if you did.
Of course.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you so much.
We love the show. We appreciate the thoroughness that you have. You are cerebral people about everything, and that to us is rare, and that's why we are fans of the show and listeners and regular listeners, and that's why we think it's a privilege to be on this show.
Oh, well, thanks very much. You're too kind. And we will be wanting to have you guys back in the future. So just keep us on speed dial there.
Awesome.
Okay. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks.
Forrest, I am particularly curious. What is your overall takeaway from this experience?
I guess it's our second official ghost hunt, maybe third. I'm losing track now. The first one really was Kent, the paranormal weekend there. And that was just us walking around. I think we had a EMF meter and a Zoom recorder. And that's the first time we saw someone using a DR60.
Yeah.
And we're impressed by that. But, you know, I mean, that was very casual and fun. This was a more serious investigation since that time. So it'd be a year later. It just goes to show how unpredictable things can be, whether you're expecting something to happen and it doesn't, or you're not expecting something to happen and it does. It throws you off. And I got to say, I started off that whole trip thrown off. I was totally discombobulated from the moment I got on the plane. I don't know if I've told you or if this has ended up on the air, but basically that night I was going to take a red eye into Indianapolis and get picked up by Roger and Jill. And my shuttle got canceled like 20 minutes before I was supposed to get on there. So then I had to call a Lyft driver. And speaking of Lyft, as I was lifting my really heavy bags full of gear and equipment down off my steps, I pulled a muscle in my thigh. Yeah, that kind of set the tone where I was just kind of limping around, bumbling around. My luggage didn't arrive in Louisville, so I spent 24 hours in the same clothes. I did shower. Yeah, I was just kind of in a daze and still sleep deprived, but really hyper aware. And there is a vibe about that place that is not like the paranormal tingle as some people describe, as Jill would describe. Like you actually feel numbness or tingling or coldness. You have a physical reaction. You know, it was just kind of a cool, spooky place. And I didn't know what I would see. And then this is the weird part about it. Like minor things happen. Of course, the groan happened. Now, you know, you're like, whoa, that's wild. I heard it being played back right then, but I did not hear it while it happened. I did smell the rose smell, the scent of roses really strongly. That's unusual because the rest of the place smells like an abandoned building. No one was wearing that as a perfume. those are minor things and more delightful. But I didn't see anything strange until I saw something so normal, it didn't even occur to me that it might be something paranormal. And that was the dude at the end, the dude doppelganger, just coming out of nowhere. And again, he looked like he was just illuminated by a flashlight, but no one was really pointing a flashlight at Jim. But again, glancing up, it looks so normal and regular and pedestrian, literally, and prosaic, just somebody crossing in front of Jim, going into one of the rooms. I didn't even pay it any attention at all. And then I swear that people were talking about it. Like, they just asked Jim right there, did you see anybody cross in front of you? And he said, no. He said, well, we did, right? And Forrest, you saw that? And I was like, yeah, I saw it. I did see it. And now people don't remember that. Now I'm questioning myself. So it's a real kind of a jumble with a lot of different small experiences adding up to something really unusual. I guess I would say that. And I would definitely want to go back again and just repeat these experiments, because what I will say, as Jim said, and everybody who's been there to do a ghost hunt, that place is haunted.
That's going to wrap up our show on Waverly Hills. While Astonishing Legends is dark the next 2 weeks, subscribers to Astonishing Legends will be given access to the pilot of a new show, The Midnight Library, on Saturday, October 5th, 2019. We'll return the week after that with the first of our 3 shows for our favorite month of the year, October.
Please remember to support our sponsors. They help keep the show free and the lights on in Blanket Fortiana.
Special thanks to John Bolin.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm Jay Perry.
SUFFERMIC.
Our show is edited by Sarah Voorhees Wendell and co-produced by Tess Feifel, who is also our head of research.
Our theme, which is available as a ringtone, was composed by Judson Crane, and our sound design and additional composing is by Ryan McCullough.
Special thanks to the Astonishing Research Corps.
But most importantly, we want to thank you, our listeners. Visit our store at astonishinglegends.com or interact with us and other listeners on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
You can also support the show at patreon.com/astonishinglegends, where patrons have access to additional bonus content. No part of this show may be reproduced anywhere without permission. Copyright Astonishing Legends Productions.
Good night.
That's good, because in the last one you sounded like you're going to throw up a little bit.
Whoa, that's that was the joke that Roger.
You're on a roll.
Forrest, you have to say with a like Louisville, and I go like Louisville, like Brian Williams. Louisville, Brian Williams here. Well, in Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville.
So that was all
It's almost
recording.
okay. Good.